My name is Winifred May Callahan. I'm 82 years old, and tonight, I stood barefoot in the rain with my nightgown clinging to my skin, shaking, not from the cold, but from the shame. My grandson, Thomas, had just slammed the door shut behind me. But it wasn't him who screamed the words that broke me. It was my grandfather. Yes, my grandfather. Harold Callahan. He's still alive. 102 years old, mean as a rattlesnake, and just as venomous. He never aged in heart, only in bones, and even those still creaked with control. I had come back to the family house after the hospital stay. A simple fall, they said. But it was more than that. My body broke because my soul had been carrying too much weight. I hadn't told the doctors that part, or that my nightmares were no longer dreams, they were memories of what he did to me growing up. They wheeled me out, saying I needed rest. Rest. How do you rest when your abuser still sits in the same chair he made you kneel before? When he still holds the same Bible he used as a weapon instead of a guide? I thought time would have changed something. Him. Me. The way my family saw me. It hadn't. Get out. Grandpa Harold had screamed that evening, his bony hand pointing like a judge's gavel. You think you can shame this family again? Rolling on the floor like a possessed child, sobbing for attention. I hadn't said a word. My knees still ached from the last time he made me do that in front of him, at 9 years old. I cried then too, but crying only made it worse. It made me weak in his eyes. Ungrateful. He'd told the others it was discipline, and they believed him. That night, I looked at Thomas, hoping for mercy. But he looked away. You're just old Grandma, he muttered. You confuse things. You always have. The door shut. My cane clattered against the wet pavement, and I stood there, 82 years old, shivering in the same rain I used to watch from that porch as a little girl, wondering what freedom looked like. I didn't know where to go. Not anymore. I shuffled down the street with nothing but an old shawl, a purse with $12 and a bus pass from the last decade, and one secret I'd never told a soul. Harold didn't just scream at me back then. He touched. He commanded. And one night, when the power went out, he made me. No. I can't say it. Not yet. But I will. Soon. Because I'm not walking away this time to die quietly. I'm walking to find the truth. And when I speak it, the whole Callahan family will burn in it, righteously. But first, I need a place to sleep. And someone to remember me not as the crazy old lady they threw into the street, but as the woman who survived. The woman who will finally speak. They say your life flashes before your eyes when you're dying. But what they don't tell you is, sometimes it flashes before you even live. That night, I ended up at a gas station 2 miles from the house. The clerk didn't even look up when I came in. I must have looked like a ghost, an old woman in a rain-soaked nightgown, muddy slippers, and a purse that looked like it had survived the Great Depression. Maybe it had. It was my mother's. I sat on the plastic bench by the restroom and held it tight, like it could protect me. My mother. I haven't spoken her name in years. Eloise. She died when I was 12. They said it was pneumonia, but I know better now. You don't cough yourself into the grave that young unless you've been broken from the inside out. She married Harold when she was 16. He was her stepfather. But back then, no one questioned that. Nobody questioned Harold. He was the church elder. He built half the town. He fed the poor. And when he told Eloise to marry him, or watch your siblings starve, she nodded. She gave him everything. And he took even more. The memories came back sharp, like paper cuts across the soul. I remember her scream the night before she died. I remember hiding under the bed. And I remember the silence that followed. And Harold, sitting at the table in the morning, chewing bacon, humming a hymn. I found peace in the Lord, he'd said. And so should you, Winnie. He called me Winnie when he wanted to pretend we were a happy family. Winifred when I disappointed him. And girl when I made him mad. I looked down at my wrinkled hands. 8 decades old, and they still trembled like that little girl hiding under a bed with a pillow between her knees. The door of the gas station chimed. I was startled. A man in his 30s glanced at me, then did a double take. I looked away, ashamed of how I must have looked. You okay, ma'am? He asked, stepping closer. I almost cried, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. He reached into his pocket and handed me a small wrapped sandwich and a bottle of water. You need me to call someone? I shook my head. You got a place to go? I nodded, even though I didn't. I couldn't trust anyone yet. Not until I figured out what I was going to do. He left. I waited until the clerk looked away, then went into the restroom, dried off with paper towels, and locked the door behind me. That night, I slept sitting on a toilet seat, clutching that purse like it held salvation. In the morning, I took the first bus to somewhere quiet. Somewhere I hadn't been in 50 years. A retirement town called Ash Pines. Back when I was young, I used to work in a library there, fresh out of high school. It was before the marriage, before Harold tried to marry me off to a widower at 19 who had 3 kids and a drinking problem. I'd run then. Briefly. But he'd found me. He always did. This time, I had to go where no one could find me. But as the bus pulled into Ash Pines, I saw something I didn't expect. A little bookstore still stood on the corner. Same faded green paint. Same creaky sign. Fern's Books and More. And sitting behind the counter, gray hair in a braid, glasses on her nose, was the only friend I ever had. Fern Taylor. I hadn't seen her since 1967. My knees shook as I stepped off the bus. Was I really going to do this? Return to the only person who once said, Winnie, you don't have to carry other people's sins. I didn't know if she'd even remember me, or believe me, but I had no choice. I walked into the shop. The bell rang. She looked up, and her mouth fell open. Winifred Callahan, she whispered, standing. Tears rushed to my eyes before I could stop them. But just as I opened my mouth to speak, the door behind me slammed. I turned, and there, standing in the doorway, was a woman in her 40s, red blouse, clipboard in hand, and a cold stare. You're the one who walked out of the nursing home last night, she said sharply. You're not allowed to be out here. You're a ward of the state now. I froze. How? How did she know? Who reported me? And worse, why did she call me a ward of the state? What had Harold done behind my back? What power did he still have over me after all these years? Fern stepped forward, putting herself between us. She's not going anywhere, she said calmly. She's with me now. But the woman's eyes narrowed. And suddenly, I felt a cold truth crawl up my spine. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was planned. Harold was pulling strings again, and he wasn't done with me yet. Fern didn't flinch. She stood like a mountain between me and the woman in red, whose name I'd later learn was Denise Frommer, state-appointed elder welfare officer, which sounded kind until you learned what it really meant. She did the paperwork for people society wanted to disappear. Winnie's not going anywhere, Fern said again. Calm. Firm. Not a flicker of doubt in her voice. You can leave now. Denise smiled in that way people do when they think they've already won. She's listed as mentally unfit, she said coolly. According to the papers signed by her guardian, Harold Callahan. My stomach dropped. Guardian. I was 82. I hadn't declared anything. I still voted, still paid my little utility bills back home, still remembered how to make Fern's favorite gingerbread recipe from memory. But none of that mattered now. Not if Harold had managed to convince a judge I'd lost my mind. I'm not mentally unfit, I whispered, stepping forward. That man has abused me my entire life. Denise raised a hand. Ma'am, you need rest. And medical care. We can discuss all of this back at the facility. Fern turned to me, and for the first time, I saw fire in her eyes. You trust me, Winnie? I nodded. I didn't even have to think. Fern picked up the store phone and dialed faster than I'd ever seen anyone her age move. Dan, she said into the receiver, I need you at my shop. Bring the paperwork. It's Winifred Callahan. No, she's with me now. Yes, that Harold Callahan. She hung up and faced Denise. You've got 5 minutes to leave before my attorney arrives. Denise's smile wavered. She stared at me one last time, then at Fern, then turned and left, muttering something about non-compliance. I nearly collapsed. Fern caught me and guided me to the dusty old chair by the counter. She didn't speak. She just poured a cup of chamomile tea from the back room like we were still 25 and nothing had changed. But everything had. I sat quietly, soaking in the warmth of the cup and the even warmer silence of a place I'd once called safe. When I finally spoke, my voice was raw. He made me roll on the floor. In front of him. Like a dog. Fern didn't gasp. She didn't cry. She just nodded. Like she'd always known. How old were you? She asked. 8. Then 11. Then again at 16. And then I told her the rest. About the wooden spoon he'd make me hold with my teeth when I cried. About the basement where he made me recite Bible verses while he sat on the steps with a belt in hand. About how he told me I was cursed like my mother, and how he said the only way to break the curse was to obey him completely. Obey. That word alone still made my skin crawl. I tried to tell Auntie June once, I whispered. She said I was making things up to get attention. Said, good girls keep family business inside the home. Fern put her hand over mine. Good girls don't roll on the floor, Winnie, she said, repeating Harold's words, but with mockery, not reverence. But brave women survive it. And then they tell the world. That was when Dan arrived. He was Fern's nephew, a civil rights attorney who looked like he'd walked out of a courtroom in Manhattan. Tall, salt and pepper beard, sleeves rolled up. He didn't ask me to explain. He just asked, do you want to fight? I didn't hesitate. Yes. He nodded. Then let's start with pulling your state file. If Harold filed for guardianship over you without your consent, we can undo it. But we'll need proof of capacity. Statements. History. Witnesses. I have no one, I said softly. You have me, Fern said. Dan smiled. Then you've got more than most. For the first time in years, I felt something I'd forgotten existed. Hope. But hope is dangerous too, because it gives you something to lose again. And Harold knew how to take things from me better than anyone. That night, I stayed in Fern's spare room above the bookstore. She still had that lavender quilt we'd sewn together in '65. It smelled like cloves and mothballs and memory. I slept deeply for the first time in weeks. But in the morning, Fern was gone. The front door was wide open, and the bookstore was trashed. Shelves overturned. Books on the floor. The register ripped open. There, on the counter, lay a single item. A Bible. Harold's Bible. And inside it, a photo of me as a child. Kneeling. On the floor. My hands are bound with a shoelace. And in the corner of the frame, Harold smiled. Like he'd won again. But not this time. This time, I would not stay quiet. This time, I would not forgive. This time, I would fight. Even if it killed me. I stood there, in the middle of Fern's bookstore, staring at the photograph like it was a portal to hell. I hadn't seen that picture in over 70 years. I didn't even know it still existed. But there it was, crisp, preserved, as if Harold had been keeping it like a trophy. My little face, twisted in tears, my knees raw against that wood floor, hands tied like I was livestock. And him, Harold, smiling in the corner with that god-awful belt draped over his arm like some kind of badge. My legs buckled. I dropped to the ground among the fallen books. But I didn't cry. Not anymore. I had shed oceans over that man, rivers over his sins, and I was done being well for his poison. I picked up the Bible and held it like a ticking bomb, because that's what it was. Evidence. Dan came bursting through the door minutes later. He froze when he saw the mess. They ransacked it, I said. They took Fern. His jaw tightened. They? He asked. I showed him the Bible. The photo. He didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. Then quietly he said, This changes everything. He called the police. Filed a report. But I could already tell by the way they handled it. Slow, doubtful, detached. They didn't want to get involved. Harold still had influence. He donated to the sheriff's re-election campaign, funded the church, wrote checks with God's name on the memo line. But Dan was different. He wasn't afraid of Harold. He'd taken on cases like this before. He told me I needed to stay hidden for now. Said he'd find Fern. That she was too smart to go down without a fight. I nodded, but fear sat heavy in my chest. That night, I lay in the guest bed again, holding the photo like a dagger I hadn't yet learned to use. And the memories came. Like fire. When I was 13, Harold locked me in the basement for 3 days. No food. Just water from a rusted sink. He said it was because I looked at a boy in church. Said the devil was inside me and that he had to cleanse me before I became like my mother. He read scripture through the floorboards. Verses about obedience, about purity, about submission. And then, when he came down on the 3rd night, he made me roll. He stood in the shadows, arms crossed, and said, Roll, girl, like a pig, because that's what you are without discipline. I had bruises on my back from the concrete, cuts on my palms. My nightgown is torn at the sides. And still I rolled, because I was afraid of what would happen if I didn't. I woke with a scream lodged in my throat and sweat soaking the sheets. Dan was already up, coffee in hand, working on his laptop in the living room. I sat beside him and watched him scan legal documents with the speed of a man on a mission. We found something, he said, turning the screen toward me. Your medical file. They claimed you were suffering from severe cognitive decline. Signed by a physician named Dr. Edwin Phelps. I blinked. I've never met Dr. Phelps. Dan nodded. Because he doesn't exist. He's not a licensed physician in this state. It's a forged signature, which means the guardianship was a fraud. I covered my mouth. He continued, We can file an emergency injunction. But we'll need more. We'll need testimony, records, maybe even a public statement. You mean tell the world? I mean show them what Harold really is, and expose the system that let him get this far. I didn't answer right away. Telling the truth meant reliving it, but hiding it meant he'd keep winning. I pulled the photo from my purse and laid it on the table. I'll testify, I said. I'll tell you everything. Dan gave me a long look. Then we start today. We recorded my full testimony that afternoon. 2 hours of stories I'd never told anyone. Names, dates, places, what he did, what he said, the scars I still had, the shame he buried in me like seeds. Dan uploaded the footage and stored backups. But before he could file the motion, the bookstore burned. It was midnight when the sirens wailed. We rushed outside and watched from a distance as flames consumed the shop I once hid in as a girl, the same place I had rediscovered my voice. Gone. Fern was still missing. No one had seen her. But I knew. Harold was warning me. A final warning. Don't speak. Stay in your corner. Be a good girl. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I was the woman who survived. And I had nothing left to lose. Dan handed me the final draft of the legal motion that night. I signed it with a hand that shook. But not from fear. From fury. Let's go to court, I said. And just as I set the pen down, my phone buzzed. A text. From an unknown number. It was a photo. Fern. Tied to a chair. Bruised. And beneath it, a message. Come home, Winnie. Alone. Or she dies. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. My fingers went numb. Fern, my Fern, tied to a chair like a hostage in a movie. Blood at the corner of her mouth. Her braid undone. Her eyes were swollen but still defiant. I knew that room. The wallpaper. The wood paneling. It was the basement. Harold's basement. That godforsaken place where I'd left pieces of myself year after year. And now he had her there. Like bait. Dan leaned over my shoulder, read the message, and straightened like a soldier at war. He's bluffing, he said. We go to the police. No, I whispered. He's not bluffing. If I call anyone, he'll hurt her. Dan was already on his feet. Winnie, he's 102. He's not physically capable of this anymore. Someone's helping him. I looked up at him, and the words came out like ash. He doesn't need strength. He has control. Dan fell silent. He finally understood. Harold didn't tie those knots. But he pulled the strings. He always had. And there was one more thing. He wants me to come alone, I said. Because he knows I will. Dan began pacing, muttering legal terms and contingency plans, but I already knew what I had to do. I was going back to that house, to the room where my nightmares were born. But this time, I wouldn't roll. This time, I would rise. I dressed in silence, not in my nightgown or the donated clothes Dan had fetched. I wore the Sunday blue dress my mother had sewn me when I was 16. The one Harold hated because it made me look like I thought too much of myself. I wanted him to see me in it, whole, undiminished. Dan tried to follow. I told him no, but I let him install a tracker in my purse. I won't let you go blind, he said. If anything goes wrong. Everything already went wrong, I said, stepping out the door. Now I'm just cleaning up the pieces. The town hadn't changed much. Same old storefronts. Same cracked sidewalk. Same streetlight that blinked outside Harold's house like a heartbeat. I walked slowly up the gravel path to the porch, each step heavier than the last. The door creaked open before I even knocked. There he was. Harold Callahan, propped up in his favorite wooden rocker, a cane across his lap, that same cruel smirk on his face. Well, look what the cat dragged in, he rasped. I stepped inside. The air smelled like mothballs, whiskey, and something else. Fear, maybe. Or memory. Where is she? I demanded. He chuckled. Always in a rush, Winnie. You never did learn patience. I'm not here to talk. Oh, but I am, he said, rising shakily. You owe me that. I don't owe you anything. He limped closer, leaning heavily on his cane. You think you're strong now, he said, because you got some boy with a tie writing papers for you? His name is Dan.
And he's going to bury you.
Harold laughed. Let me show you something. He led me to the basement door. My throat tightened. No tricks, he said. Just the truth. I followed him down. Same creaking steps. Same darkness. Same stench of old secrets. And there she was. Fern. Still tied. Still breathing. Her head lifted the moment she heard my footsteps. Winnie, she whispered. I ran to her, untied the ropes with trembling hands. She clutched me. He said he'd kill you if I screamed. I'm here now, I said. You're safe. But behind me, I heard the click of a lock. The door. Harold had shut it. Then I heard the second sound. A second set of footsteps. From the shadows, a man emerged. Stocky, beard, face half covered. One of Harold's cronies. Probably one of the men from the church he used to mentor. They called him Pops. Thought he was a prophet. I told you she'd come, Harold muttered, leaning against the wall. The man nodded. What now? Now, Harold said slowly, we remind her who she is. He looked at me then. His voice turned to gravel. Roll. Fern gasped. I stood frozen. Get on your knees, Harold growled, louder this time. Roll. I didn't move. The other man stepped forward. Do it, or I'll make her. He pointed at Fern, and I did something I never thought I would. I laughed. It came out of me sharp, loud, ugly. Harold flinched. What's so funny? He hissed. I turned to face him, my hands steady now. I used to think you were God, I said. But you're just a scared old man who's never been told no. I reached into my purse, pulled out the recorder Dan had planted there. Red light blinking. Harold's eyes widened. You think anyone will believe this? He sneered. You're crazy. You've always been crazy. No, I said, stepping closer. I'm the sane one. And I'm not alone anymore. I lifted my voice and screamed. Help! Harold Callahan is holding hostages in his basement. The silence after was terrifying. Then, sirens. The man with the beard bolted. Harold stumbled, fell to his knees. And I knelt beside him, not because he asked, but because I chose to. You should have left me in peace, I said softly. His eyes filled with something I'd never seen before. Fear. As the door burst open and officers flooded the room, guns drawn, I held Harold's gaze one last time. You made me roll for you, I said. Now the world will watch you fall. They dragged Harold out in handcuffs. He didn't scream. He didn't beg. He just stared at me like I'd betrayed him, like I was the sinner. The officers escorted Fern and me out of the basement, blinking into the flashing red and blue lights of the night. EMTs checked her pulse, cleaned the cut on her lip, and wrapped her in one of those silver emergency blankets. She looked frail, her age showing in every inch of her face, but when she squeezed my hand, her grip was iron. You did it, she whispered. I shook my head. We did it. Dan arrived moments later, out of breath and wide-eyed. He ran straight to us, disbelief scrawled across his face when he saw Harold being loaded into the back of the cruiser. You got him, he said. No, I replied. He got himself. I just stopped hiding the truth. We spent the night at the police station, giving statements. Mine took hours. I told everything. The basement. The bruises. The prayers used as weapons. The photograph. The forged guardianship documents. Every belt mark. Every rolled humiliation. And when I was done, the young female officer across from me, Officer Delgado, stood up, walked around the table, and hugged me. No words. Just quiet, human understanding. Fern gave her statement too, along with the audio recordings and the basement photo. Dan had already submitted the court motion to dissolve the fraudulent guardianship, and now, with everything we had, he filed for an emergency protection order against Harold and any associates. It felt like we were finally safe. But healing, that was something else entirely. 2 weeks later, Harold was formally charged with elder abuse, kidnapping, falsifying legal documents, and assault. He pleaded not guilty. Of course he did. His lawyer, a smug man with hair too black to be honest, claimed I was senile, manipulated, looking for attention in my final years. I didn't even blink. Let them say what they want. I'd spent too many years letting fear keep me silent. The trial was scheduled in 6 weeks. Dan said it would be grueling. He said I'd be cross-examined, doubted, shamed. I told him I didn't care. I've already lived through worse, I said. This time, I get to do it with a seat and my voice intact. In the meantime, Fern insisted I stay with her. We fixed up the upstairs room together. She let me repaint it however I liked. I chose yellow. Sunlight yellow. The kind of color that dares sadness to walk in. We spent the afternoons in her garden, picking tomatoes, pulling weeds, talking about books we'd never finished and pies we'd never learned to bake. It was the first time in my life I felt like I was living on my terms. But every night when I closed my eyes, I could still hear Harold's voice. Roll. Obey. Repent. Until one night, I decided to do something different. I pulled that photograph out one last time, took it outside, and burned it. I watched the flames devour his smile. And I whispered to the smoke, "You don't get to live in my head anymore." The next morning, I woke up lighter. And that's when the letter came. A handwritten envelope slipped under the door. No stamp. No return address. Just my name in sharp cursive. Winifred Callahan. I opened it slowly. It was a single page. Written in Harold's handwriting. You think you've won. But you don't know the whole story. You never did. There's more buried in this family than you're ready to dig up. Tell your lawyer to stop. Or everyone you love will bleed. I read it 3 times before I could breathe again. Dan's hands clenched into fists when he saw it. He's threatening you. From jail, he growled. That's witness intimidation. But I was already shaking my head. No, I said. This isn't just about me anymore. He's talking about something else. Something older. Dan frowned. Like what? And I looked at the letter again, rereading the phrase, "You never did." Suddenly, I remembered. There was a trunk. In the attic. Old. Rusted. Always locked. Harold said it was my mother's shame box, for her sins. He never let me near it. But what if it wasn't hers at all? What if the real truth, the one he was terrified of, was hidden in there? I stood up, heart pounding. I need to go back, I said. To the house. Dan blinked. Winnie, that's not safe. I don't care. Winnie. I need to know. I need to see what he buried. Because that letter isn't a threat. It's a confession. Dan was already pulling out his keys. If we go, we do it right. We wear body cams. I bring backup. And we have a warrant. I nodded. But deep down, I knew. What we'd find in that attic might change everything. Not just about Harold. But about my mother. About my past. And maybe even about me. Dan pulled strings faster than I ever thought possible. Within 2 days, he'd secured a search warrant for the attic, citing Harold's threatening letter, and convinced a local deputy to accompany us for safety. Fern insisted on coming. I'm not sitting on the sidelines anymore, she said. arms crossed, that stubborn glint in her eyes. If he's hiding something up there, I want to see it too. So on a foggy Thursday morning, we returned to the house. Harold wasn't there, of course. He was still behind bars, awaiting trial. But the home, it felt like he was in every corner. Like the walls themselves were watching. Even the air smelled like him, aged tobacco, musty wood, and stale pride. The deputy, a young woman named Kara, led the way in with her flashlight. We didn't speak much. There was no need. Dan directed us upstairs. I hadn't walked those stairs in decades. My legs trembled with every creak of the old wood, but I didn't stop. Not this time. At the end of the hallway was the attic door. It groaned open like a beast exhaling. Cold air spilled out. Dust danced in the sunbeams, slicing through the slats in the roof. Forgotten furniture loomed in the shadows like ghosts, old rocking horses, broken chairs, cardboard boxes labeled Sunday school materials, and finally, the trunk, iron-clasped, locked with a rusted padlock. It was smaller than I remembered. Or maybe I had just grown. Dan knelt beside it. "This it?" I nodded. Fern stepped forward, placed a hand on my shoulder. Kara handed Dan a bolt cutter. "Do it clean. Chain's too old to resist." The lock snapped with a loud crack. And then, silence. No one moved. Dan slowly lifted the lid. Inside were bundles wrapped in old linen, a Bible, a silver crucifix, and beneath it all, files, notebooks, newspaper clippings, photos, and a black leather-bound journal with initials carved into the front. E.C. Eloise Callahan. My mother. My hands shook as I reached in and pulled it out. It smelled like time. The first page was dated May 12, 1956. Today he hurt me again. But this time, he said it was because I smiled at the delivery boy. I don't remember smiling. I don't remember anything but pain. I wanted to tell Winnie, but she's too young. And he said he'd kill us both if I opened my mouth. I gasped. Fern grabbed my arm. Dan kept reading over my shoulder as I flipped the pages, each one darker than the last. More entries, descriptions of beatings, religious rituals, warnings about the curse of womanhood that Harold drilled into her. Every line a dagger. Then, halfway through the journal, "He's not my real father." I froze. Mama told me once, before she died, that Harold married her only months after I was born. She never said who my father was. But Harold insisted on changing my last name. Said it was for our protection. I don't believe him anymore. Dan leaned in. Your mother wasn't Harold's daughter. She was his stepdaughter. I nodded slowly. Which means he wasn't just your grandfather by title. He wasn't blood. No, I whispered. But he made himself God in that house. Then Fern pointed at something deeper in the trunk. A stack of envelopes. They were addressed to women. All different names. All different handwriting. And they were opened. Are these? Fern began. Kara picked one up and read it aloud. Dear Ms. Callahan, thank you for speaking up. I, too, spent summers at the Callahan house during youth camp. I never told anyone before, but Harold used to. He told me I'd go to hell if I told anyone. I thought I was alone. Thank you for giving me a name again. Dan's mouth fell open. They were victims, he said. He abused dozens, maybe more. This is evidence of a serial predator. The reality hit like a freight train. He hadn't just abused us. He'd made a ministry out of it. Camp programs, church retreats, counseling sessions, all a mask. He was a monster in the preacher's clothing, and every letter was a cry for help, one that had gone unanswered. Until now. I looked at Dan, my voice steady despite the fire in my chest. We need to get these to the DA.
We will.
But I wasn't done yet. I turned back to the journal. The last entry was from October 3, 1961, the day before my mother died. I'm going to run. Tonight. I've hidden the letters in the attic, behind the second board. If something happens to me, maybe someday Winnie will find them. Maybe then, she'll know the truth. I just hope it's not too late for her to grow up free. My knees gave out. I fell into Fern's arms. My mother tried to protect me. She tried to expose him. But he got her first. And buried the truth like bones in a shallow grave. Dan was already on the phone with the district attorney. Kara began snapping pictures, cataloging everything. And I just stood there, holding the journal to my chest, feeling every heartbeat echo my mother's final wish. That someday, I'd be free. I stepped to the attic window. The sun was rising over the trees, casting long golden rays over the town. And for the first time in my 82 years, I felt taller than the house Harold built. They called it the trial of the decade. The courtroom was packed wall to wall. Reporters, former church members, retired school teachers, even strangers who had read the news and driven across state lines just to sit in the back row. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us. Harold Callahan sat in his wheelchair like a shriveled statue, wearing a brown cardigan and a smug smirk. Still trying to look like somebody's sweet old grandpa. But now the world knew better. The evidence we found in the attic had shaken the entire county. Over 30 women had come forward in just 2 weeks. Some were in their 50s now. Some were in their 70s. And some had died long ago. Their letters were all we had left. Dan stood by me every step of the way. Fern held my hand through every hearing. And on the morning I was scheduled to testify, I wore the same yellow blouse my mother once wore in an old photo I found tucked inside her journal. It had tiny embroidered sunflowers near the collar. She looked so happy in that picture. That was the woman I was fighting for. That was the woman Harold tried to erase. The courtroom was silent when I took the stand. Even the judge seemed to sit straighter. I cleared my throat and began, voice soft but unshaking. My name is Winifred May Callahan. I'm 82 years old. And I have come here to tell the truth. And I did. I told them everything. The floor is rolling. The belts. The fake guardianship. The bruises Harold called God's correction. I read aloud from my mother's journal. I passed around the photo of me at age 8, bound and on my knees. I didn't cry. Not until I saw the jury's faces. Some wept. Some looked sick. But all of them believed me. For the first time in my life, I was no longer just the woman in the background. I wasn't the crazy old lady who got confused, or the family shame everyone politely ignored. I was seen. I heard. I believed. The prosecution closed its case with the evidence from the attic. Dozens of testimonies, handwritten letters, photos, even a secret audio recording one of the newer victims had made during a visit just 2 years prior. When it was time for the defense to speak, Harold's lawyer stood and said only one thing. My client is too ill to respond. The room tensed. The judge sighed. Let the jury decide, she said. 3 days later, the verdict came. Guilty. On all counts. The courtroom erupted. Fern hugged me so tightly I thought I'd crack. Dan shook my hand like I'd just climbed a mountain. And Harold? He didn't even look at me. He just sat there, jaw twitching, hands clenched in his lap, lips whispering words I couldn't hear. Later, I learned he was repeating a single phrase.
This is still my house.
But it wasn't anymore. Because that same week, while he sat in a holding cell awaiting sentencing, we filed a petition to seize his estate under the state's Victims' Restitution Act. And we won. Every inch of the house, every penny in his hidden accounts, all liquidated to compensate his victims. We turned the Callahan house into a healing center. Not a cold institution. Not a government-run box. A home. We named it the Eloise House, after my mother. It has 12 rooms, a garden, a music room, a library filled with books from Fern's old shop, and yellow paint on every wall. Women come from all over the state now. Some bring nothing but a plastic bag. Some bring scars you can't see. But all of them leave knowing one thing. They matter. And they're not alone. As for me, I spend my mornings on the back porch in a rocking chair, sipping tea and writing letters to the women still too afraid to speak. I tell them, you don't owe your abuser your silence. You owe yourself your freedom. Dan visits once a week. He says he's never had a case that changed him this much. Fern moved into the guest cottage and keeps trying to teach me how to bake peach cobbler without burning the edges. We laugh a lot now. Not because we've forgotten, but because we remember and survived anyway. One afternoon, a nurse from the prison called. Harold had died. Heart failure. No visitors. No funeral. No last words. Just a man who thought himself a god, dying like a ghost. I didn't shed a tear. I walked into the garden, knelt by the rose bush I planted for Mama, and whispered, "We did it, Mama. He's gone." And I didn't have to roll. Not once. I'm 82. And for the first time in my life, I'm finally free. And that is the end of Harold Callahan's chapter. But my story, it's just beginning. 6 months later, the Eloise house had a wait list. The local news came by once a week. A regional women's magazine wrote a full spread about the 82-year-old warrior who took down a monster in a cardigan. Donations poured in, some big, most small. But every check came with a letter. And those letters broke me more than the court ever did. One said, "My daughter never believed me. But after your trial, she asked me to forgive her." Another, "You gave me the courage to speak to my pastor. He turned out to be just like Harold. But now he's behind bars too." And then one arrived with no return name, just a note inside. "Thank you. You saved my granddaughter's life." Those words haunted me, in a beautiful way, because for every scar Harold left behind, I now saw a light rising in its place. A voice. A truth. A life no longer controlled. But the past wasn't done with me just yet. One rainy Thursday, as I was organizing the letters in the Eloise house archive room, Fern came rushing in. "There's someone here," she said, breathless. "She says she knows your mother. And she has a photograph." I frowned. "My mother." "She says her name is Helen Moore. Said she's 90. And she remembers you as a baby." I hurried downstairs. There she was. Small frame. Cane. Crooked smile. Eyes that looked like they'd seen too much, and remembered every second. She clutched a worn photo in her hand. I took it. It was a photo of my mother, younger than I'd ever seen her. Holding a baby, me, in front of a small, unfamiliar white house. There was a man beside her. And it wasn't Harold. I looked up, heart racing. "That's your real father," Helen said gently. "His name was Samuel Rivers. He worked at the train station. Your mama loved him." I blinked hard. "She never told me." "She couldn't," Helen interrupted. "Harold found out. Ran him off. Told the town he was a drunk. Lied until people believed. Your mama never saw him again. I swallowed the lump in my throat.
Where is he now?
Helen shook her head. Gone. Years ago. But you have cousins, Winnie. You have a whole family that's been searching for you for decades. My knees buckled. Family. I thought my tree had rotted from the root. But here was a branch I'd never known existed, stretching toward me. I visited them 2 weeks later. In Tennessee. They welcomed me with tears and peach cobbler. There was a woman named Laverne who looked just like Mama. A boy named Teddy who looked exactly like I did at 5. And a great-grandniece who wrote me a poem that said, "For Grandma Winnie," whose voice lit the fire
that warmed our names from the ashes.
My world opened again. I now belonged to more than just pain. I belonged to healing. And healing is louder than abuse ever was. Later that year, I gave a speech at the Governor's Summit on Elder Justice. I stood in front of hundreds, microphone in hand, hair done by one of the women at the Eloise house, yellow blouse, heart thumping, and I said, for most of my life, I thought the only way to survive was to stay quiet. But silence doesn't protect you, it protects them. I am here today to tell you that no matter your age, your voice still matters. I am 83 years old. I was abused. I was forgotten. I was discarded. But I survived. And I stood up. And now, I am louder than my abuser ever was. The crowd stood. People wept. And somewhere, maybe in heaven, maybe in my heart, Mama smiled. That night, Fern and I sat on the porch. Stars out, tea steaming, soft jazz playing from the window. She looked at me and said, "You ever think you'd get to be the hero of your own story?" I chuckled. No. I thought I'd die as someone else's footnote.
But now.
I took a deep breath, and I answered honestly.
Now, I'm the author.
We clinked our mugs, and I leaned back, heart full, knowing the girl who once rolled on the floor was long gone. In her place stood a woman, not bitter, not broken, but whole and free, forever. It was a quiet Sunday morning when the final piece arrived. I was in the Eloise house garden, trimming back the sunflowers with Fern, when one of the residents, young Evelyn, came jogging up the path. "Miss Winnie," she called out, holding a padded envelope. "This just came for you. No return address." I dried my hands and took it. Heavy. Lumpy. Inside was a small, sealed manila envelope and a folded legal document. The legal letter was brief. Per the amended conditions of the Callahan estate will, and with the oversight of the Office of Elder Legal Protection, the following item was retrieved from Harold Callahan's personal effects during final inventory. We are obligated to release it into your custody. I looked at Fern. She nodded. My fingers trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, yellowed but unblemished, dated 1962, from my mother. It read, "My dearest Winifred, if this letter ever reaches you, it means the truth was not buried with me. I wanted to tell you so many things, baby girl. But Harold made sure my words were either twisted or silenced. I was not crazy. I was not cursed. I was just a mother trying to love her daughter with the little strength she had left. You were never the problem. You were my light, my reason, my everything. If I don't make it out, promise me one thing. Don't become like them. Don't let your pain rot into hate. You are better than that. You are love. You are freedom. You are fire. If you find this, please live. Please speak. Please be louder than silence ever allowed me to be. I love you, always. Mama, Eloise." My knees gave out before I even realized I'd started crying. Fern caught me. Evelyn stood frozen, tears filling her own eyes. I read the letter again and again. It felt like my mother had finally wrapped her arms around me after all these years. Like she'd waited. Like she knew I'd make it through. The trial was over. But the battle had just begun. Dan helped me launch the National Survivors Coalition for Elder and Generational Abuse. It started small. Just a few volunteers, a website, a donation page. But then it went viral. The news called me the matriarch of truth. I didn't care for the title, but I wore it like armor. We advocated for new laws, mandatory elder abuse reporting for private caregivers, a national database for elder rights violations, and better oversight for guardianship fraud. One by one, those laws passed. And every time, I wrote Mama's name at the top of the petition. Eloise Callahan. Not forgotten. Not erased. Immortal. Years later, a young reporter visited Eloise's house to interview me for a book she was writing.
She asked, "What would you say to Harold if you could say one last thing?"
I smiled gently. "Nothing," I said. That chapter closed itself. He died the way all cowards do, surrounded by the lies they built as a fortress. And when it crumbled, no one came. "But," she pushed, "don't you want to say you won?" I looked around the garden. The women were laughing on the porch. Fern harvesting rosemary. Evelyn helping a newcomer unpack. "No," I said, "because it was never about winning." She blinked. "Then what was it about?" I leaned in. "It was about ending the war." The book came out a year later. The Woman Who Rolled, Then Rose. It became a bestseller. Not because of the horror, but because of the hope. Women wrote to me from all over the world. "You gave me permission to stop pretending. You reminded me that we are more than what they tried to make us. You made me believe that even at 70, my life isn't over." On my 85th birthday, we celebrated in the Eloise house garden. Dan came with his new baby girl, named Eloise. Fern made her famous lemon bars. Even Laverne and Teddy came down from Tennessee, arms full of gifts and hugs. I sat in the same rocking chair Mama once held me in. This time, I held Evelyn's newborn in my arms. And I whispered, "You'll never have to roll for anyone. You'll grow up standing tall." The sky was pink with sunset. Laughter filled the air. And I knew. The curse had ended. The pain had been transformed. Not into revenge, but into purpose, into justice, into peace. I'm 85 now. My knees still ache when it rains. I still wake sometimes thinking I hear Harold's voice. But then I remember. He's gone. And I'm still here. Not just surviving, but living. And I'll keep living. Until every woman who ever rolled in the dark knows. She can rise too. If this story moved you, please share it with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to rise, to heal, or to love again. Subscribe for more powerful stories. Your support helps survivors' voices be heard. Thank you.